he doesn't have to shoulder any of the responsibility for it when it's done. His dad has to clean up the mess. His mom sort of pads the way for him. So he is left without actually having to. He makes this mess, but he doesn't have to clean it up.
Exactly.
I thought he does take responsibility by tweaking, by manipulating the players involved. Like he does stand up and he's like, punish me. But then he says that Stokes is a bully. So he looks like a hero in one way as well.
But there's the ruined suit.
Manipulating the situation. Huh?
There's the ruined suit, and they had to save up a long time to get this ruined suit. And Tui's dad has to pay for that. It doesn't come out of his allowance.
Right.
Or anything like that. And they're supposedly going to not, deprive him of food, but then his mom keeps sneaking it up. Even though he doesn't take it, she lets him know that they wouldn't do that. So there's just all of this sort of pushing the responsibility away, or it's a phony responsibility.
I like the description, Marilyn, of him being a troublemaker, because I think in the book where they're sort of telling this origin story of Tui, it's obviously not a highly dramatic origin story where there's like some traumatic episode in his past where he, becomes tainted and then sets out on this power-seeking, journey or something. It's like he was kind of this manipulative little
brat,
and over time that's mutated or evolved into his adult manipulations, and it's like that has always been present from a young age. But I just sort of took it as it's sort of an origin story, and she does go to trouble like giving us some background there, to give us clues about the character. But I didn't infer too much, David. It's sort of more like, dropping some hints there about his early life. It's not related to some big event that made Tui evil, but it's something inside the character.
Yeah, Patrick, that's really interesting, because I was thinking, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this was that we meet Tui in this chapter anyway at an earlier age than for most of Rand's characters, and not, there are some other stories, Dagny and Atlas Shrugged, and this little Seagale wine in Fountainhead, and it's interesting to see how a character develops. People complain that Rand's characters have no arc, and I was thinking, well, how about Tui? But I never thought of the point you're making. That's right. He seems like kind of a piece from the time he's 5 or 7 years old when he goes after Johnny Stokes. Of a piece in a sense. I mean, we want to know what that piece is, what the elements are. But yeah, thanks. That's a great point. Kai?
Yeah, I think Rand might think that a lot of what makes a person go on the trajectory that they're at happens in those first few years of life within an individual consciousness, that she doesn't blame it on the environment or anything like that, or upbringing. She thinks that it's within an individual mind they make certain decisions, and I think it's in Atlas Shrugged, but I'm not sure, where she says that when confronted with an other consciousness, some people must surrender to them, right? They're just kind of overwhelmed by that, and there's probably a whole variety of pathologies when it comes to that, that sort of confrontation with reality or confrontation with other minds as well. So he seems to be of a piece right from the start. And just wanted to also mention on Marilyn's point, which is he doesn't pay for any of his activities, right? Like she was saying with the suit, the dad pays. And so I think that's a kind of commentary on altruism, that altruism often has this kind of two-layer type aspect where there's very compassionate people who can kind of get suckered into the simplistic ideology, and then there's always people who are attracted to power, who manipulate the masses of people, who don't end up paying. In fact, they end up getting.
That I want to ask if anyone else noticed something along those same lines. It's a different. I think it's the same theme, but in a different, along a different dimension. Notice what he says when his mother wants to ask the father for a bicycle, and then a new suit, and Ellsworth says, "Oh no, I don't need that. We can't afford it." Nice boy, very altruistic, very self-denying. But did you notice the little barbs in what he says? So,
Right, about someone else's father bought him a bicycle, but he doesn't need one. Didn't he?
yeah,
You're
good.
type.
His dad, the mother had his own business, but his dad doesn't. So we
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
So it's like a little dagger in there, barb. I'm calling it. What's that about?
Well, it seems that he understands the code of altruism straight away, right? For whatever reason, and he knows that it's kind of like that point that's made that I think it's in Atlas Shrugged, where you're using the moral code of like Hank Reed, it's used against him, right? His own moral code is used against him. Like his own family is constantly guilt tripping him and that sort of stuff, right? And it's only his own code that allows it to be manipulated in the first place, to be hurt by that. And it seems like Tui is that sort of character. He understands that, like when you say to the father, like, "Oh, that guy down the street, he's just a show off and has a bigger business than you anyway," right? He seems to be manipulating envy, but also the moral code which says you should feel guilty at the same time for that envy, right? So he seems to be like a mastermind type of bad guy that just understands everything from childhood, which is I suspect a little unrealistic, frankly. But I don't think that's fine. That's fiction. But I don't think it's unrealistic for kids to kind of have these strategies from very young ages. They're just very crude about them. It's like I work with kids, and I see some kids are not nice kids. They're actually little monsters, and for whatever reason, right? Maybe they have bad upbringings or whatever else. I don't really know, but from the youngest of ages, you can have kids that are mean-spirited, power-hungry, all that, and maybe they change, but maybe a lot of them don't. And the only people that kind of get to see a whole trajectory is the people, their families, right? Otherwise, we don't tend to watch people through every stage of life and going, you know what, you were a rotten kid, and you're a rotten teenager, and you're a rotten adult. we don't tend to have that experience a lot, I think. But teachers kind of do. They get to see, in primary school, they get to see kids growing from, well, even in high school as well.
Some parents too.
Yeah. But
you're right about that he's a manipulator. But for what ends?
Well, he's not a materialist, but he cares about power over people. That's his version of power. And a question I'd like to maybe go into later with the group is, what's that relationship between him and Gale? Because they're both power seekers. But what's the difference? But we don't have to talk about that straight away.
David, to answer your question, it seems to me that he's an equalizer. He wants to equalize everyone. He's playing with people's virtues, and if they're not smart enough, he manipulates them to knock them down a few pegs by their own doing. So he's a master manipulator, even at a young age. And different than Kai, I found it very realistic. But I had an older brother who's dead now, who I would say was an evil manipulator. He might have been a mass murderer, but we don't know. But he was a pathological liar. And I had an older sister who was a genius. She was the top tennis player in the world, and she was just amazing. So I got to see my older brother by 4 years tortured me and I got to see the black and white.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the Fountainhead, it was so real to me. It was so real.
Yeah.
Just to comment on that, like I got a evil twin brother, because there's always an evil one, right? So, so I can relate to what Michael's saying. But I think one thing we have to remember is we have memories from childhood, and so it's not like if you went back in time and watched yourself, I think, and watched your brother, you'd see that he's been manipulative and there's things, but you'd probably see through it a lot quicker. That's all I'm saying. That you'd go, it's in a cruder form. That's how I see it. Kids are pretty sophisticated compared to, say, other animals, right? They're very sophisticated. They can be Machiavellian and all that, but compared to adults, when they've got 20, 30 years to, like, I've seen kids where they have psychopathic tendencies and other bad tendencies. They're just cruder. It's more honest in a sense. They don't seem to have the social theory of mind isn't fully on board yet for them to kind of know what they look like from the outside, to go, I better be more cunning and covering up my evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my brother would, for example, torture animals and stuff, and he wouldn't think anything about it. It was only when he got feedback from other people where there's like horror, then they go, oh, he goes, oh, I guess I better hide that. You know?
Well, Tui's mother models.
Marilyn.
I was saying Tui's mother models this behavior, where she chooses sides. He's got the normal. He's a slight kind of a weak baby, right? They didn't think he would live as a child, and then they have the sister who's normal but healthy, just a regular kid, and the mother very overtly favors Ellsworth, and it says here it made her grow in spiritual stature to know the extent of her own magnanimity and her love for so uninspiring an object.
Right.
So, but
he
also,
was,
we have that sense of this, my mother really thinks I'm a loser, and she's going out of her way to, to punish herself, and by forcing herself to love me. That, not in defense of Tui at all, because I don't want to defend him, but that was possibly there in his childhood as well.
He was getting altruism with his mother's milk, so to speak.
As it were.
As anyone else, I see him as a genius in the making. That the profile as the kid is not a normal kid, but is actually a genius. This is going to be a dictator or a pope, or going to be some really powerful person. So it reminds me like a star athlete, but the antithesis.
Your point, Michael.
Yes, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I think Rand's heroes are intellectuals, but her villain in this book or villains are also of that kind. I mean, and perhaps to the more philosophical points of like the social theories, like Marxism versus capitalism and that sort of stuff. It's like these days, a villain that's just like a brute who might come along and take something away from you by force, it's not so much of a threat. Like it could still be a threat, but quite likely someone like that will get discovered and thrown in jail pretty quickly. But someone who's very, very intelligent and is using that ability to kind of stay a couple of layers back from power, but manipulate, the chessboard the way they want it, is a much more kind of and modern villain. Yes, Kai. Sorry.
Let me ask around. Kai, give me a second here. Let me ask around. Let me ask Adele, if I may. Some of the others that I've talked about people they know that remind them of Tui or have something of that element. Does that resonate with you, your experience? someone who's a manipulator like Tui? You may be muted, Adele.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I haven't known anyone who's been that manipulatively awful to that kind of extent.
Okay,
Lucky.
I hope you never do. But all right, let's talk a little bit though. What
I did want to make a quick point, which was
oh yeah, fine.
that like the story function of showing his childhood, right, is that it completely closes off the possibility that someone might have sympathy for him as an adult and say, you know, maybe, you know, like people can have sympathy towards evil. I think Ayn Rand really despises that idea, to have mercy towards evil, right? But if you actually show him being evil right from the start, you're like, you can't go, well, maybe he had a bad childhood, or, you know, his parents beat him or something.
Mm-hmm.
You can't find any excuses, because it's like, his parents weren't that bad. Like, maybe they're not perfect, but they put up with his evil in a sense. That's kind of the only thing that's bad about them, is they put up with it and were manipulated by him. But they all seemed otherwise okay people. So it's him. He's this evil. There's no excuses for him. And perhaps, I'm not sure, maybe when in the time, more in the era when Rand was writing this book, those sort of ideas of blaming the parents and stuff for everyone was more in vogue. I'm not sure. But it's certainly the case, like say in Freudian psychology, it's always the mother's fault, right? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, that goes to Patrick's point that there's a strong continuity without a sharp trauma that changes his character. And so, yeah.
That also foreshadows when he does say things or do things, we already have the background foundation for it. So as if he's like a building. She set up the skeleton, she set up the foundations. And so later acts and says something, we already have it's along his theme.
Yeah, in the literary, I was wondering, as I was going over this again, the placement of this chapter on Tui's background squarely in the middle of part 2, which is about Ellsworth Tui, and why it occurs here. And I don't have I'd like to hear what anyone else has to say about that. I'm just thinking that it relates to your point, Michael, that we've seen enough of his manipulation, and we've just started to, in previous chapters, started to see his antagonism and scheming against Rourke. And that's going to ramp up in the chapters that follow. So maybe this is
Marilyn should answer that, because she's a synthesist? What do you call yourself?
I said I was good at synthesis. But I haven't read enough ahead to make that. But, you know, the middle is always a very important place. I think they always sort of bury, you know, or that get that really important stuff as a writer. A lot of time, that's the place to put it.
Is that common? That the placement of that kind of flashback?
I think so. It's something that I've noticed. But, and yeah, and it seems to be almost like right in the middle, nearly right in the middle of the book as well. So pivotal chapter maybe. But I don't have that much more. I'd have to think about it some more.
Okay. Guy?
Maybe the trajectory of by showing the trajectory he went through as a kid, like you're showing it kind of in his infancy, then he kind of gets into religion, then he abandons religion, and kind of then turns into kind of like communism and stuff. Maybe it's kind of like encapsulating in his life history, kind of like the history of altruism in general, right? That it started off in more primitive societies and in primitive ways, and then it was taken over by religion, and then taken over by communists.
That's a great point.
Very nice. Yeah.
Anyone It's a great point. That's a point Rand makes elsewhere in her nonfiction writing, that socialism is just Christian altruism without the metaphysics, or with actually a worse metaphysics of a denial of the reality of the individual self.
So that's an amazing integration of an abstraction of like the history of altruism. You could take that,
yeah,
and it makes it kind of real in a little boy's character, his formation.
Yeah, I know. That's a great point, and it's another thing that kind of reveals how great a writer Rand really was.
Yeah, and also look at the strength of postmodernism in recent times, right? Like when I went to university several years ago, I noticed it and I was like, what is this thing? And I find it much more despicable than religion, frankly. And if you look at Toohey, he kind of goes out of communism just to kind of it's not communism anymore. It's just kind of undermining things, right? It's just undermining the mind, undermining concepts, undermining
architecture
without actually having any positive that it's how he's holding up. He's just tearing things down, and I think that's part of that Rand's genius. I think is seeing this.
Well, what exactly is he tearing down? I think this gets to the essence of why he's evil, an evil character. What is he really after?
The mind. He wants to be the only mind.
I think it's set up with the hose, watering down the boy that's good looking, athletic, powerful. He's masculine. I mean, that little boy is like a little bit of a bully, but he's also knowledgeable. Things come easy to him. Is that the psychological thing is just to hose down anyone who surfaces. You just push them back.
Right.
So I think that's logically
desire. I mean, he goes after people for feeling love or having sexual desire. It just is, so that's really not. How could you possibly think that that's important, right? I think even that thing about the bicycle, and of course that he says, well, there are so many more things we need than the bicycle, as you pointed out. But then, of course, he's undermining any attempt that his parents have made to actually succeed. Right? I just thought of Kira, because Kira, who they're struggling, but Kira would come home and say, I need a dress, and wouldn't think anything of it, wouldn't think twice about it. I mean, I'm going to the opera and I'm getting that dress. So that sense of that her enjoyment, her demanding of life, her demanding to live life and get as much from it as she can, in the way, and Toohey exact opposite of it, as if, I mean, it's just, I just hated this chapter. I feel like I need to shower or something. It's just, I can't stand talking about him.
So, but Kant said what he's after is destroying the mind, and that's got to be part of it. But isn't it kind of broader? He wants to destroy the self, particularly the independent, the notion of independence, or, I mean, he goes after the excellence, the smart guys, and the handsome ones and the athletic ones. But he's also he's trying to undermine them, but he is also, think about the other side of the equation, the Drippy Muns, I think, was the character that are attracted to him, and he kind of gathers around him because they're quote unquote losers. I mean, they're not.
Well, I think I can answer this a little bit, David, is that I think firstly he's climbing a power structure and he's creating his own power structure. I think that he doesn't necessarily want to destroy minds, but control them, and certainly wants to be the top of the hierarchy. And I think that Rand's hierarchy is a hierarchy of the mind, right? Where her heroes all are creative. They use their mind for building, useful, beautiful things, or things that benefit people around them through the trader principle and things like that.
Right.
And he uses his mind. He's very smart, but he uses his mind to attack and undermine others. So he doesn't use the creative capacity. Like, that intellect was not turned to good works. It was turned against others and kind of denying its potential.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a point to this, and something I don't understand. It's more just floating. This doesn't even need to be discussed, but there were pre-altruistic societies, and certainly Christianity, which is something that Rand levels her razor-sharp logic against. There were pre-Christian societies, and it's interesting how the altruistic set of ideas seems to be fairly effective at propagating. And I think her points about having that non-altruistic, strong individualism it's like it's more difficult to communicate that set of ideas and have people accept that framework. Apologies, I forgot. I was going to say something else, but I lost it. So,
when you say accept that framework, Patrick, you mean the altruist framework or Rand's different framework?
Well, I mean a more individualistic framework, even a society that's not built on altruism. For example, I think Christianity came after Judaism, which had a more, tit for tat, like an eye for an eye sort of philosophy. But more to the Tui character, I think that he doesn't use his mind. Oh, here's the point I was going with this, which is I have this kind of silly belief. It's not quite altruistic, but I think that if you are gifted and you are smart, then you owe it to yourself to develop that, and potentially to others too, because there aren't, an unlimited supply of really brilliant people out there doing amazing things. In fact, there's a very limited supply. So I think, we've tried to set up our schools and our system to develop those people and incentivize them to do good things, right? And some of those incentives are like economic and educational and these sorts of things. And it's good to do that. We should. So for whatever reason, it's like something went wrong with Tui's incentivization and decided that, I'm not going to turn my powerful mind to doing good things, but instead just repositioning myself by manipulating others.
I have a question for you all. Is Marilyn said she hated the Tui background, right, Marilyn?
Yes.
And sometimes, like when I've read a novel before and they have a character and they go back in the background, I'm like, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to see that. I loved it. I enjoyed reading about him. I just click, click, click. I love this. What did you guys think about his background, the chapter of his background?
I think he's deliciously evil. I enjoy the Tui character. I don't like. There are evil characters in film and books that I read where I'm creeped out by having them on the screen and stuff. Tui's is not one of them. To me he's a little bit of a caricature, and I don't use that. I probably shouldn't use that word because I love him as a character, and he's an extreme character, and he fits very well in a romantic novel where all the characters are pushed to the extremes, and that's the thing that I guess that is slightly unrealistic for me, is that and I should say that when someone pointed out that I think it was you, Michael, that he's the making of a Hitler or something, that actually makes it, okay, he's a great man in a sense, like just a great Hitler, right? So that helps. But in my experience, evil's petty. That people who are evil develop and become powerful and stuff. They start off being very petty. They're very petty people. It comes out of envy and things like that, and that it takes time for them to kind of develop their for evil to grow its teeth. That in its youngest forms, I see it as a very petty thing. So, but yeah, as you said,
there's a whole interesting question here about the theme that Rand develops in Atlas Shrugged about the impotence of evil. Chewie is somewhat of an anomaly, maybe. I don't know, but I think Rand says somewhere that she, later on in life, that she had reservations about the character. But that raises an interesting question, though. I mean, Chewie, all the stuff Chewie's doing with the guys who become dependent on him and his efforts to tear down the guys who don't depend on him or who are independent, suggests that he wants to destroy the sense of selfhood, of autonomous, integral selfhood that Rourke has. And to me, the most dramatic aspect of that is the description of when he was in New York and was a guidance or career counselor, directing people away from what they really loved.
Yeah, everyone's worse off when they are done with him.
Yeah, they become dependent. But does he have a self? I mean, you just described a couple fascinating things along the way here in chapter 9 and 10 about it's as if he had a master plan.
Mm-hmm.
He seemed to go about his life calmly, like everything is falling in place for me. This is just one more step toward.
He's not like Peter Keating, right? Like I think we need to spend some time at some stage contrasting Tui with Gale and Tui with Keating. And so
absolutely,
Keating is a dependent man, right? He doesn't have a self-contained ego. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Can someone mute their mic? Adele? Thanks. Yes, he doesn't. Peter Keating doesn't have a self-contained ego. He's a dependent man. Whereas it seems to me Tui does and Gale does. So does anyone have any comments to add to that?
Well, I was going to go back to David's comment, was that there's the passage of him talking with the financial guy about making money or the stock market and playing the stock market. And he says that I'm a collector of souls.
Right.
Where he's not invested in his ego or in his own well-being. He's invested in collecting people, to collect their spirits.
I think he's a parasite. I mean, he's like a tapeworm. And I don't know how mindful that is. It just attaches and then it keeps going.
Well, he doesn't have to create for a living, right? I mean, his living is he's a critic. He's an architecture critic. So it's like he doesn't produce buildings, or draw them, or design them. He just compares them and tries to say like, oh, this one's not as good as that one. And Peter Keating, I mean, has some creative capacity. It's not genius. He's able to sort of reproduce works, iterate on them, move things along, but he's hamstrung by his need for approval from others. And that makes him like very vulnerable to someone like Tui, who is capable of manipulating someone's emotions and giving them a false sense of approval, false airs. Whereas Rourke, who's the hero, the only approval he needs is his own. He doesn't really crap about what other people think about his buildings. He's like, I know it's great. I've poured everything into this. This is people will recognize it eventually, or if they don't, then screw them. You know, whereas I think that metaphor of him as a parasite, and maybe he's very calm because he realizes, oh, I'm never really going to have to like lift a finger. I can just kind of move these pieces around, right? And that's how I'm going to get through. So I'm not, I don't know his master plan, so don't spoil it.
Well,
No,
there's
the cheating.
that
Go ahead, Michael.
when it comes to Peter, Peter's all so simple for him. That's like first grade arithmetic. He's got Peter pegged. He's got him around his little finger. He knows how to manipulate him. He knows how to control him very, very easily. It's not a challenge. But Rourke is a challenge. Dominique is a challenge to him because he's kind of like puzzled by her. So it's interesting that in his own way, he's going after the best.
Oh.
That's interesting, yeah.
But he does actually say, like when he's giving the speech to Peter Keating, when he kind of lays out like this is the way to, all these tricks. Like he says, you know, you can don't let people be happy. That's a nice little trick, right? And he just lays out all these tricks, but he also talks. He doesn't want any independent men. Independent men just need to be crushed when they're in kids, right? And he talks about this. There's this horrible metaphor. Sorry, Patrick, have you come to this bit yet? Where he talks to Peter Keating in his bedroom?
I finished section 2, so.
Anyway, I don't have to go into the details, but it's a great scene where he talks about what he does to that person's brain and stuff. It's a horrible metaphor. Again, deliciously evil though. But he doesn't want independent men. So I think that's what this book is really about: is the aspect of the rational, like a rational individual. It's emphasizing independence versus dependence. That seems to be the core tenet, as opposed to, say, in Atlas Shrugged, where it's more, say, self-interest versus altruism. Like that's in the Fountainhead as well. But I think it's actually like a backup theme, and it's important. Like towards the end of the book, it's very important, right? But I think the primary one is actually independence versus dependence. And a question I'd like to ask the group is: can you have an autonomous mind? Can you have a self-developed, self-sufficient ego and be evil? Can you have like bad values and be not a Peter Keating, which has this kind of social mind, but have a self-contained mind? Is that what Tui is?
All right, good question. Anyone want to take it up?
Ask the question again. I didn't follow it.
My question is like, so there's this contrast Rand makes between independent minds like Rourke and dependent minds like Peter Keating. And so my question is, can you have a independent mind and be evil? And I think that's what maybe Tui is he seems to be very independent, right? No one has any strings on him at all. And he has no social obligations to anyone. And in his childhood, again, notice how he didn't get any, there was no costs to him. Every time he did something, there was never any obligations to him. He was just doing, because he was able to give up material things, that kind of made him kind of invincible, right? Because he didn't care about material things. So he was able to play the game for souls.
Codependent on
Michael, say it again. You were breaking up.
Dependent on Rourke. Rourke is motivating him to do things. That's where Dominique's trying to say, I don't want to be influenced by Rourke. I don't want this. And Tui is planning and figuring out things and masterminding things on how to manipulate the situations to take Rourke down. So he's codependent with Rourke. He's not with material things or simple things, but he does want to take down Rourke's spirit, and that's making him codependent.
Well, codependence is a term that, in some ways, is the modern version of what Nathaniel Branden used to call, or maybe it was Rand's term, social metaphysics, that Tui doesn't really create. What his intelligence is directed at is not the world, but people. And he's cunning and very smart about that. But, you know, unlike Johnny Stokes, who, going back to that early childhood, Johnny wrote this rebellious paper, brilliant, but, you know, shocking. Ellsworth wrote a very conventional, straight, you know, kind of well done story about, you know, the glorious school days. And
anyone who's been to school knows that that is not true. Okay.
So, but you know, back to the president of the novel. He needs Rourke not to exist. Rourke doesn't need Tui not to exist. I mean, so Mike, I think your point is telling about the extent to which Tui is not independent. I mean, he's not dependent in quite the same way Peter is in terms of wanting immediate praise and acceptance and status.
Well, maybe here's another metaphor, David. It's kind of the classic funny one. It's like Tui's not able to grow the pie. He's just able to redistribute it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That could be in any number of material ways. Like he doesn't contribute to architecture by building anything, just criticizing it. And then in the social movements, you know, he's always that figure that's, you know, involved with charity or giving other people's money away to causes so that they can feel better about it. Or when it's the temple, you know, he wants to basically tear the temple down and ruin Rourke's reputation. He's sort of like a net positive in anything. I feel like it's just.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Starter Temple. That's Michael. Do you want to jump in on this point?
Oh, I was wanting to say, what did Kai think about that?
Sorry, can you just summarize? What's the question? What's the
Tui's codependence on human spirit versus independent in all his methodology?
I think it's a good point to contrast with Gale, because that's the like Rand's message about Gale is he thinks he has all this power, and then when he uses the paper, he goes, I finally have this power. I'm going to use it to defend my friend, right? And he fails. It doesn't work, right? And then that's when he realizes that he talks about on the boat with Rourke. He talks about how what is it you talk about? He talks about how he's the most selfless person there is. Like the mystics have tried to have no ego. I have no ego at all. Like if you want to see a collective ego, if you want to see that concretized, look at my paper. That's my paper is the concretization of it. And if you think about what a paper is, like the stories and stuff, that's a horrible thought, really. Like the junk that's in papers, right? So with Gale, he is destroyed by that fact, right? He finds out that he thinks he has power. He's given up his values for power, and he thinks he's like Rourke, that he's a good person deep down and all that. But he realizes he's sacrificed it for nothing. But so I think Michael's point applies more to Gale than it does to Tui. I think with Tui, I don't think he is codependent. I think he sees the reason he wants to destroy Rourke and have him locked up is precisely because he can't be controlled. I think he sees him as like the ultimate enemy for him because he can't be controlled. And so, and I think his primary goal isn't like popularity and all that. He wants power. He wants to run the world, right? He wants to ultimately run the world. And so I think in that goal, he just sees people like Rourke go, these people can't be allowed to exist because they get in the way of this goal. That's how I see it.
Well, not to jump ahead too far, but I mean, isn't there a difference between Winans and Tui's desire for power, because Winan, or at least their strategy, Winan seeks power by the usual means of wealth, political influence, hard negotiating. I mean, you know, he's sort of a Donald Trump type in, you know,
more like a Murdoch, right? He's like
or
Rupert Murdoch.
Murdoch, yeah, right. Whereas Tui seems like he's after the power of the spirit. He wants to be to get inside people's heads, or to eat out their brains, so to speak, eat out their independence and autonomy, so that it doesn't really matter. You know, they, you know, we keep having these images of the faceless mob, the drooling beast that Mallory. Well, that's in the next chapter. But the thing that Cameron was afraid of back in part 1, and the thing that Catherine, remember that scene where Catherine fled from her uncle, having an anxiety attack, and she was, you know, she felt oppressed by a faceless, nameless something. And I think that's what the you know, the strong characters, the heroes, are afraid of in the world. But in a sense, isn't that what Tui wants?
A pragmatist, and Rourke is a creator, and then Tui is power hungry he wants power over people.
Right.
They have their kind of identities.
I think
Back and forth.
Right. No strong identity.
Well,
I mean, that's what it means to be an individual, right?
Gail's got a strong.
Who
doesn't have a strong identity? Gail. I think Gail's got an extremely strong sense of identity. I think
but he's a pragmatist at heart.
Yeah, definitely. I think he thinks that he can, like, in Ryan, you know, Rand's list of like 7 virtues, and like one of the virtues is integrity, which is that he thinks he can, in his mind, in his consciousness, he can have values, and he thinks that when he acts in the world, he can just be pragmatic, right? And he can just be ruthless, and he thinks that is possible. And so he's basically has no integrity, right? I mean, that's the essence of the character. One of his primary characteristics is he has no integrity.
I think that it's easy to see perhaps why Gale is more of a institutionalized form of power, because he has an institution, right, which is his press company.
Yeah.
Then we know in the real world that there are either religious or secular institutions that have a lot of influence and power. I think that Tui is like deliberately not a politician, and deliberately not a religious figure of the sort. Like, for example, you take the Catholic Church, and there's like the papacy, and there's just this huge power structure that's inside the religion, and things built up around it. And I think that Tui is supposed to be a more abstract representation of maybe a lot of those things, like not necessarily religion, but is also a figure who sometimes discusses it and talks, you know, about it in the book. And there's also kind of these secular altruistic goals that he has, you know, with like nonprofits and charities and that sort of thing. So I think it's kind of this, he's a abstract point to represent these things in the book, but it's not necessarily institutional power, but like the power of the ideas themselves. And
but I think that can be applied to every character in the book, Pat. Like every single character represents abstractly something, right? That's one of the things I really love about the book. So what does he represent, though? What's the abstraction he represents?
With religion, at least, there's an idea that, all right, well, maybe this life isn't doesn't matter that much. But there's this next life, right? And it's going to be great. But with Tui, it's not even that. Tui's just like, there's nothing. It's just a living death. There's nothing to look forward to. I find it's disturbing.
Right. Very,
Yeah,
very.
exactly. Yeah.
I think it's intrinsically like I don't think this is correct, but maybe it'll give us the right intuition, which is they say it with sadists, right? They get sexual desire from humiliating and hurting people, right? So it's intrinsically valuable, right? Because it's pleasurable. I don't necessarily think he's getting sexual pleasure from it, but I think it's intrinsically pleasurable to him to dominate the minds of others. I think that is the goal for him. Like on a social level, he wants power over individuals around. Like he wants people to be dependent on him. I think just the very act of doing that is the goal, just in of itself.
Doesn't he name that later with Peter Keating? Isn't there a point where he lets his guard down?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
in his bedroom, right?
In the book.
Yeah, I think when
Yeah,
it
that's
goes.
in part 4.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll get there. Okay, we're nearing the end here. I just want to suggest that a lot of what we've been talking about with Tui is revolving around his antithesis and hatred of independence, independent minds, integrity. Think about the concept of envy, and in particular, Rand wrote a great essay called "The Age of Envy" in the 70s in the Ayn Rand letter. That would be worth looking at because I think she describes it as the hatred of the good for being good.
Yeah.
That is, the desire to tear down that which you yourself can't possess or don't really want, but you don't want others to have it. And I think, one way to look at Tui is that he's a fictional embodiment of that, like Iago in Othello, only worse.
I'm not sure about that, David. I think actually Gale definitely is, right? Because he has this perverse history where he finds independent men that represent his values, and then he tries to destroy them, right? And he even does that to Rourke, and it fails, and that's when he respects Rourke. So I think Gale is the character that represents that hatred of the good for being the good. But I'm not sure about Tui because I think he has different value system. So I don't think when he's tearing down Rourke, it's not because he thinks he's good as, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's obviously he doesn't share the same values, right? It's not like yeah.
Well, it's a good point, Kai. Good point to raise. But let's look at what look for signs of what Tui actually thinks about Rourke's architecture, especially in his conversations with Dominique.
Oh, he thinks he's great.
He has good taste, right? But like he gets that statue for Gale as well, and gives the statue. So he's able to see things as beautiful and so on. But I don't get the sense that he actually shares those values, though. It's like he understands how other people think. Like this is how Gale would think. This is how he can. It's almost like he understands the objective truth is that Rourke's buildings are wonderful. But does he ever? Does he share that himself? Could he even be evil? And you know what I mean? Like, could you listen to a symphony and it was a beautiful symphony? And could you actually? Could that's a good question. Could Tui listen to a beautiful symphony, and actually, he'd be able to objectively say, yeah, it's wonderful music. But would he actually be moved by it? That's maybe an interesting way of putting it.
Well, envy is a paradoxical feeling precisely because you hate. There's some way in which you do see that it's good, and but unlike jealousy, you don't actually want it. You just don't want others to have it. So I don't know. It's a good point to ponder. I'm raising it at the end here, so we'll have to put this on the agenda to follow up with. Michael,
Um,
your hand up?
Adele, Kate, and Patrick, do you have a time that you would prefer? On Saturday or something around 3 o'clock Eastern time before?
Sundays work for me better than Saturdays, for in the afternoon like the previous time, but on a Sunday would be work for me. At the moment, I'm on holidays and will be for a few weeks, but at the moment it's now 1 a.m. in London and on a weekday, so usually that's why I haven't been coming, but I'm on holidays now, so that's why I can do it. But
Yeah.
so I'm fine for the next few weeks, but yeah, I guess Sundays would be my ideal.
How about you, Adele? You're in Germany. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So what time is it right now for you?
2 o'clock here, yeah.
2 in the morning.
Mhm.
Okay. So how about with Sundays in the afternoon work better for you? That would be your evening, probably.
And
Yeah.
just my group meets Sunday afternoon, which means I wouldn't be able to join you. Well, I meet at 3 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yes. The living group is on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not that I'm saying that you can't do that, but I'm just saying I wouldn't be able to join you at that point.
Yeah.
It could,
We should try to work around it. Figure out a better.
So Marilyn,
solution.
would you be willing to have it like 2 on the same day but at different times, or is that just too much commitment on a single day?
No, I could do 2 on the same day.
I'm hosting the Fountainhead next week, but I'm flexible. It doesn't matter to me what day or time I do.
I'd
So
rather do mine first because I have to moderate it, and then I can just come in and then kind of relax,
Right.
and come in for the second one. But of course,
That suits
Michael's
me.
not there, and it's your turn. Well, so we'd have to work that out. But definitely, I would be happy to do a second on Sunday, especially if it got more people in.
Patrick,
What about
what's your availability like?
I'm pretty good for weekends and for evenings. On weekdays, I can't do Eastern time working hours. So that's it. I'm willing to move things around. I thought the old time worked fairly well, but maybe it'd be worth putting together like a spreadsheet or something. It's funny that GoToMeeting doesn't have a feature where you can arrange a recurring meeting or something. I think that'd be after all this time. Yeah, so I don't know if that helps. I could set a spreadsheet up and just drop that in the Facebook group or something, and then just like a Google Doc or something. People can.
Yeah, we did a survey a while back, asking whether evenings during the week would be better than weekends, and I guess people like that. But I know people are not showing up. So
Yeah.
apart from the few and the brave here. So we could ask around, but I probably want to. We can organize this with Maryland's. We got constraints here for Maryland and
Yeah.
Patrick in particular.
Yeah, we can. We'll. So worst case, we'll have next week's at the same time, same bat channel. Best case is, we'll have a communication with the team through the Facebook group. So if you just watch out for any kind of communication within the next couple of days, we'll make a decision as far as whether or not we're going to try to bring it into this weekend as an alternative. I'm thinking Sunday afternoon, so it would be after Maryland's We the Living reading group. See if that works for you guys.
It works for me.
Okay. Appreciate you guys'
Sounds good.
dedication, especially those over there in Europe. Thank you so much for the wee hours, and look forward to chatting with you guys again at the next call.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey.
Bye.